One. Good afternoon, and thank you for joining us during our second afternoon of Florida Shines Virtual College Week. My name is Nashla Dewari. I will be facilitating today's session, which is all around the topic of financial aid and the FAFSA. Now, before I begin, I want to go over a few items with you. If you have questions during today's session, please put them in the chat section, and we will address them during the live Q&A or in a follow-up email. Closed captioning is provided for this session, so please click on the link provided for you in the chat box. This session will also be recorded. The recording, along with all the materials shared today, will be posted on our website, floridashines.org. And finally, we are live on Twitter, so feel free to share your comments and connect with us at FL Shines. Now, I'm excited to share something that's new this year. We are giving away swag bags from our colleges and universities here in Florida to a few winners. So if you're joining us tonight, you are entered to win one of those. We're also going to be sending a follow-up email after this session with information about applying for a $1,000 scholarship. The scholarship is new this year. It's being awarded by the Florida Association of Educational Data Systems, so we want to thank them for their sponsorship, and we definitely want to encourage you to apply if you're attending today. Now, I'd like to introduce our speaker for the evening, Bill Spires. Bill is currently their Director of Financial Aid at Tallahassee Community College. Previously, Bill worked at Jacksonville University as the Director of Placement and Personnel, and then the Director of Student Financial Assistance. Bill is a member of the National Association of Student Financial Aid Administrators, the Florida Association of Student Financial Aid Administrators, and President-elect of the Southern Association of Student Financial Aid Administrators. So congratulations, Bill. We're honored to have you with us today. Thank you for being with us.
Thank you. It's exciting to be with you today, and I know this is both an exciting time for parents and a frightful time for parents as they begin to embark on this process of applying for financial aid. Hopefully, as we work through this today, we will demystify some of what you've been told through the years. Too many times parents have heard what a difficult process it is. It really isn't, and I want to assure you that everyone listening to this webcast today should know that everybody can complete this process. It's free, and you will do just fine. We're going to address common FAFSA questions today in this session, and I'm getting, and we're going to cover 4 very important questions today, and then I'm going to give you some things that I think you need to remember. First of all, what is the FAFSA? What changes with the FAFSA this year from previous years? What are the most important questions you must know about how to answer on the FAFSA? How do you get started? And 5 important things you need to remember. So we're going to cover all of that in a brief period of time today. So what is the FAFSA? The FAFSA is the common document used by every school in the country for students to apply for federal financial aid and most institutional and state aid. It's an acronym, and the true title is the Free Application for Federal Student Aid. Again, used by every school in the country, and it determines what your expected family contribution is going to be. The information you put on this form helps us determine what kind of family contribution you will have. It's always important to remember that the family has the first responsibility for paying for college. From the inception of the Higher Education Act of 1965, that has been the premise from which we have all worked. As a matter of fact, I tell families the story that Lyndon Johnson was president, and he felt that every family should have skin in the game because when he went off to college, he had to sell his Model T Ford in order to fund his college education. So he felt every family should have skin in the game. The main thing to remember is it's always more than you feel you can contribute, but remember it's the same amount at every school you apply to. throughout the country. So what changed with the FAFSA for 2019-20? Well, really very little on the paper application itself, though everybody will be completing the application online, or at least you want to do it online. The minor wording changes occurred, but for the most part, the form itself remained fairly constant. We did change the form this year, and I had the privilege of sitting on the committee that provided input to the U.S. Department of Education on changes to the form, and the form was changed to a new format to reflect what students are seeing in other web arenas today and make it more common and easy for them to look at and understand when they're completing the form. The big change that occurred this year is the fact that you can now complete your FAFSA online on your mobile device, either your tablet or your telephone. And this is a big change. This is the first year families have been able to do that. So I guess you could probably retitle it FAFSA on the go, but it is available to you, and we encourage you to use the FAFSA information. Get it in there as the best you can and however you need to, either on a desktop, a laptop, a mobile device, however you need to do it. The important thing to know is to get it going as soon as possible. And remember, as of October 1st, you can complete the FAFSA for the 1920 school year. You will hear me say that several times because it's very important for families to get moving on this process. What are the most important questions you must know how to answer on the FAFSA? I guess I've been presenting financial aid seminars for over 35 years, and I hear that question every year from every audience. And the issues we will address today are the things that I've heard with the greatest level of frequency. First of all, when you get the FAFSA form, and remember, you're doing this online, so that is the FAFSA form, answer all the questions correctly and honestly. You have to make sure, because people say, well, I think something's going to change. Well, that doesn't matter. You're answering the questions as of the time that you're filling in the FAFSA, and any changes would come later, and you would work with the school on those. So answer every one based on exactly how they ask that question with the correct answer and honestly. As you get ready to go in to do the FAFSA, you should collect your 2017 IRS 1040 forms and W-2 forms. These are the primary documents you're going to use to answer the financial questions on the form. So it's very important that you have those documents in front of you. Notice that it's the 2017. So everybody listening today, or at least the lion's share of the people listening to me today, should have their taxes complete and should have the ability to have them in front of you. Now, this is a question that people say, you know, I don't have a valid email address. Well, both the parent and the student need to have a valid email address, and they need to be different email addresses. I hope everybody heard that little nuance there, but every parent must have an email address, and every student must have an email address, and they have to differ. They use this for the purpose of sending information out, so it's important that you, if you don't have an email address, that you create one. There's multiple sites where you can do that for free. Students are considered dependent of their parents until age 24. Oh my, how many parents call me and say, but my child is self-sufficient and live outside the home. It really doesn't matter. Until age 24, they are your dependent. If you are their natural parent, unless they were removed from the home for cause, or unless both parents are deceased, or they are or the student has a dependent for whom they provide over 50% of the support for, or unless they were homeless, and just a very few reasons. So when you boil it down, students are dependent until age 24 in most cases. Now the next one is very important. Only the biological or adoptive parent should complete the FAFSA form. if the student was adopted prior to the age of 13, the adoptive parent would complete the form. If the student was adopted after the age of 13, the student automatically becomes independent, and the parental information would not be included on the form. So only the biological or adoptive parent, if they adopted the child before the age of 13. That's a big one, because too many times I have grandma, grandpa, aunts, and uncles who say, well, the child has lived with me and they've been under my jurisdiction for X number of years. It really doesn't matter, because if they were put in your custody, then at the time they graduate, that child would actually become independent if they were put under your custody by a court. So that's very important for parents and students to know. If they've had a fight with the parent, if they aren't living in the home, if the parent refuses, they are still considered dependent of their parents. If the parent will not provide the information required, then at that time, the student only qualifies for a limited number of loans. So that's an important issue for families and parents to know. The parent with whom the student lives for a majority of the year is required to fill the form in a divorce situation, regardless of who claims the student on for taxes. It's the parent that the student lives with. That one sometimes gets a little hairy, because sometimes it's a 50-50 down the center living arrangement. If that is the case, then obviously you can use the parent with the lower household income. But remember that if you do, that it needs to be based on the fact that it's a true 50-50 living arrangement. Also remember that the step-parent's information, if the parent filling in the form is remarried, would be included on the form. We'll cover that again in a few minutes. Make sure you follow the directions carefully. When I go through the form line item by line item, one of the things that I point out is every line tells you exactly where to get the information you need to put on the FAFSA. It is so simple when you look at that and you start reading it. If you pay attention to the directions, then you're going to be just fine. 90% of the errors we see are because parents or students fail to follow the directions, and they don't realize that by doing that, they're slowing the aid process, which ultimately could lead to a decrease in the amount of aid they're eligible for. So please make sure that you are following those directions as carefully as possible. Very important to use the correct Social Security number. The correct Social Security number is how we determine if the student is truly a U.S. citizen. That's how the Department of Education does. They make sure they're out there. They use it to make sure the student isn't deceased. Yes, I said deceased, because this is how they know if the student is committing fraud. So it's very important to use the correct Social Security number. And the name on the FAFSA has to match the name on the Social Security card. So if there's been a change in the name, you need to make sure that the name on the Social Security card has been changed to reflect the new name. Very important, because when we run into problems with Social Security match, it does prolong the process, and you don't want that to happen to you or to your student. I mean, that's just taking money out of your pocket and throwing it away. Make sure your date of birth is correct. Again, that's going to have to match with Social Security. And citizenship is vital. If you're a U.S. citizen, then you need to let us know that you are indeed a U.S. citizen. If you're an eligible non-citizen, make sure you use the correct alien registration number on the form. We see so many times where they miss it by one number, or they miss a number for some reason, and then we have to do secondary match. If we have to do that, we have to go through the Department of Homeland Security. When we have to go through the Department of Homeland Security, guess what? We never know exactly how long it's going to take. We don't want to have that happen to your student, by listing their citizenship correctly, having that correct Social Security number, correct name, date of birth. All of that's going to help you to avoid a potential headache as you move forward. Many of our students have participated in dual enrollment, which leads to our next question, our next statement. You know, students entering college from high school, even if they have those dual enrollment credits, are indeed first-time, never attended college, because the dual enrollment credits they receive through high school are considered part of the high school curriculum. Now, they will receive credit for those when they get to college. That doesn't change that, but what it does mean is that they will be viewed as first time in college. You want that to happen, so make sure you list them correctly in their status. One thing I didn't mention above, and I want to go back to dealing with citizenship status, is even if a student is not an eligible non-citizen, they often will fill in this form anyway, and the schools will use the information. There's many schools that will use this information to help students who are not here on an eligible status receive financial aid on their campus. So it's still possible to complete this form. Use the data retrieval tool when you get into the free application for federal student aid. Well, you say, what is the data retrieval tool? Well, this is the tool that takes your information from the IRS and brings it into the free application for federal student aid. It's a wonderful process, and it works well. And I encourage you to use it, because if you use that information and you are selected for a process called verification, if you haven't used the data retrieval tool, then you're going to have to provide us with an IRS tax transcript, which again takes time. So it's important that you do that. The data retrieval tool, the form will ask you, do you want to use it? They'll tell you the conditions under which you can use it. It goes out, grabs that data. It takes most of the financial questions right off of the form, and it simplifies the form exponentially. It is true simplification of the FAFSA. Now, I do want to tell you that when you use the data retrieval tool, the information that comes back that you see on the FAFSA will be all X's. They do that because about a year ago, the Internal Revenue Service had a data breach, and they want to make sure that your information is secure. So when you get all of the X's back, that's okay. The school will still get the information. Don't worry about that. But I also want to tell you that if you call and ask us at the school level, what is on my form, you know, how much information, over the phone, we're not going to be able to answer you. The U.S. Department of Education has told us that the only time we can provide you that information is when you appear in person with a picture ID. So just keep that in mind. The schools aren't being difficult. They're just following the laws that have been written out for us. Make sure you list the correct school code. My goodness, this is so important, because if you list the wrong school code, the schools you're interested in won't receive the information. So list that school, verify it, make sure you've listed it correctly. You can list up to 10 schools on the free application for federal student aid. If you decide you need to add more schools, you can do that. How do you do that? Well, once you submit your form and everything goes out, then what happens is that the form will come back to you, and then you can go in and make corrections. Well, you look at the schools you provided, and let's say you wanted to provide to 10 more schools. You would eliminate those schools and add 10 more schools. I know it sounds a little crazy, but that's exactly what you have to do. So you can add as many schools as you want. Once you've added the school, they get the information. And then in the final analysis, if you have to make changes again, always make sure the school you're attended is indeed listed. That's very important that you keep that out there. And then the next step you need to follow is get a federal ID at FSA ID .ed.gov. This is your electronic signature when you complete the free application for federal student aid online. Now listen, every student who is in college must have their own federal ID because every student in college has to complete their own FAFSA. At least one parent must have a federal student aid ID. They can use it for all of their students. And if the parent is a student, they can use it for themselves. But at least one parent must have that ID. Both parents do not have to have a federal ID. At least one does. Even if they're a student that they're using a federal ID, that is it. They can continue to use it. So everybody should get a federal ID. Okay, so we're moving on along now, and we're going to look at how do you get started? Well, I've already told you the first step. You have to get that federal ID. Okay? You should do that tonight. You should go home, go online, and get that federal ID. Then you need to gather your tax information. I've already told you, your 1040, W-2s. Get all that in front of you in the room. Review the worksheets for the FAFSA at FAFSA.gov. Go through and do a pre-fill of all of those items so that you're sure that you have the information they're going to ask for. By doing that, you get to find out what they're looking for and why, and it's going to simplify the process. I encourage you to do the pre-form. Determine which colleges you're going to send it to. Remember, you have up to 10. And then examine the affordability of the colleges you are interested in. Now, you shouldn't determine which school you're going to based on what I will refer to as the sticker price of the institution. Because even some of the private schools become extremely affordable when they offer their scholarships and grant opportunities. So you should look at what you're going to major in, what kind of income you're going to have, and then you're going to want to compare financial aid packages that you receive. When you compare your financial aid packages, you want to compare apples to apples. If a school costs $10,000 and gives you a $2,000 scholarship, and another school costs $20,000 and gives you a $4,000 scholarship, the $10,000 school with the $2,000 scholarship is still more affordable for you. I encourage you to look at what you plan on making, and if you have to borrow for your education, borrow as little as possible. Never borrow for lifestyle and only borrow what you need to make the education possible. But if you borrow more than you're going to be able to repay, then you need to think about whether that school is right for you. For example, my oldest daughter is a teacher, and I know what she makes, and I know what she could afford to repay. So I say this because I want to see students, when they graduate with the least debt possible, and to be able to enjoy the life as they move forward at an earlier rate. Students who overborrow find themselves in a position where they can't move forward with things like buying a home or buying a car. So consider how much you're borrowing against how much you're going to make. Then you complete the FAFSA online at FAFSA.gov. There is a paper form available, but the difference between completing the FAFSA online and completing the paper application is like night and day. If you complete it online, they're going to process it, and you're going to be finished in about 3 days if you complete it online and use your electronic signature. If you complete a paper application, and they're very difficult to get, no one has a copy in their office right now, I can assure you. But if you complete the paper application and mail it off, you can plan on it taking between 3 and 4 weeks. Yes, the federal government does not want to process paper, so they make the process a little bit difficult and make you wait a little bit longer. So I encourage you to complete the online process. Okay, let's move to the next slide. 5 important things to remember. It's important that you apply, first of all, for financial aid. It's free. People ask me all the time, how much money am I going to get? Well, I really don't know till you complete the FAFSA. I once had a family, and the father was a doctor at the time, and he had 8 daughters, all of them in college at the same time. Well, if he'd have told me I'm a doctor, I would have probably said, you don't qualify for anything. Well, guess what? With 8 daughters in college, even on a doctor's salary, he qualified for some help. So it's important that you fill it in and find out for sure what you might qualify for. It's free. The only thing it's going to take is a little bit of your time. And then everybody should be applying for scholarships. There are free internet resources for applying for scholarships. The minute they ask you for money, stop. Go away from it. But use those free resources that are available to you, because they might produce something that will help you. Also, look in your community for scholarship, your church, synagogue, your mosque. Look to the public library. Look to the community organizations like Kiwanis, Rotary, the place where you work, parents, or the place where you work, students. It'll surprise you. Some of those offer scholarships. But look everywhere for scholarships. Check with the school you're applying to. Because every time you get a scholarship, that's free money. And that affordability and the need to borrow both improve when that occurs. And then apply early. Again, the FAFSA opened up on October 1st. It's open. You can complete it. You can go home tonight and complete this process. And then that's important because many schools sort how they do their financial aid awards based on the process date of the FAFSA. So it's important to get it in early and get it in as soon as possible. Some of the private institutions are already getting ready to submit award letters to students. The public institutions are doing it right after the 1st of January into the 1st of February now. And community colleges, we're still going to run a little bit later because we want to make sure our full population is in the pool. But you need to get the process going immediately. That's what you need to remember. And then meet the deadline dates. I tell families to create a tick list and put the dates down you need to have things done, and as you finish, check it off. That's very important. A missed deadline is a missed opportunity. It's money thrown away is another way of putting that. And remember to keep a copy of everything you send. Things do get lost. When I'm speaking with groups like this, I always remind you that the post office never loses anything, and that financial aid offices never lose anything, and parents never mail blank envelopes. We had a parent just last year who called us, up to 10 times one day saying, I faxed my information to you. And we would go look for it, and we didn't have it. But what we did find is we were receiving a lot of blank paper. She was faxing the information to us, but guess what? She was faxing it upside down. So we weren't getting it, but we eventually got it. We worked through the problem. So remember, make a copy of everything and make sure we have it in our hands. That keeps the file moving. I warn every group that I talk to now, never send your Social Security number by email. There are people phishing, that's phishing with a P, that are out there looking for your information so they can steal your identity. That is one of the things you don't want to have happen to you. And so it's important, if anybody asks you to send your information, your Social Security number, via email, don't do it, and ask them if you can fax it to them. That's a better way to send your Social Security number. And then communicate with us. Any changes in your family's financial situation, we are not going to know about, and we may be able to help you under a process called professional judgment. Again, any change in the family's financial situation, talk to us about it. Let us know what's happening, and let's see if we're going to be able to help you. And you heard me allude to this throughout the presentation today. This entire process is free, whether it's applying for financial aid or for scholarships. Anytime someone asks you for money, walk away. There are people out there who tell you for a fee, we'll help you complete the free application for federal student aid. Walk away from them. There's a man in Michigan, every year he sends students to our campus, and they come down here, and he tells them when they arrive on our campus that we will be able to take care of them. Well, guess what? They're an out-of-state student at a community college. We can't help all of them. And he's charged them anywhere from $300 to $1,000. You do not want to spend that money. If you need help with this process, most of the schools in Florida are more than willing to sit down and walk you through whatever concerns you have. If they want money, walk away from them. They're probably a thief. So we want you to keep that in mind. We want you to have a good experience completing the free application for federal student aid. And with that, I am more than willing to take any questions that you might have today. Just let me know what they are.
Bill, thank you so much. I love that your presentation really makes that process easy and easy to get started. So in perfect timing, October 1st, the opening of the new form, so students will have this information to get started. I did want to ask you a few questions that we've gathered from our audience, and I'm going to invite our audience to send any general questions you have for Bill in at this time. Bill, regarding submission of the form, can parents use, instead of the W-2G forms or 1099 forms?
Yes, they can use either the W-2 or the 1099. The W-2 is just the most common of the forms used, but anything that lists their income is acceptable.
Okay, wonderful. And so as part of filling out the form and listing the schools that they're going to, where can they get the school codes from, just to reiterate?
On the online document, there is a drop-down box that gives those to you, but you can go online and Google federal student school codes, and they will give them all to you if you just want to pre-fill the information. So those are available, but they are available online on the form. If you don't find your school, and there are some schools that are difficult to find because the name you think they would be under, they're not, then my recommendation is that you just call the school directly and go to their website, because I think just about every school in the country has their code on the website now.
Okay, wonderful. So really important to connect with those schools. Bill, in terms of documentation, if a student has issues with, for example, their birth certificate or personal information having wrong information, so for example, birth certificate having a wrong date of birth, how can they work through that issue to make sure that the FAFSA can link them to the right person?
Well, and it depends on what is wrong and where it's wrong. It depends on what the Social Security Administration has. At that point, you are faced with a couple of choices. The first choice, and probably the best choice, is to go and get the birth certificate corrected. I can relate to that because when I was born, I was born according to the birth certificate that was originally printed a month before I was. So I understand that problem. I had to have my birth certificate changed, which also necessitates a change at the Social Security Administration. If you aren't going to do that, then match up what Social Security has on the form so everything comes together. So that's the most important thing, is that Social Security can match everything up for you.
Okay, really important, really interesting. Bill, that makes sense. So in terms of timing, Bill, for students who are applying to college at this time, if early admissions or early applications are due in August, the FAFSA doesn't open until October 1st. Is there a conflict there, or do you recommend that the students still go ahead and apply to admissions and then complete the FAFSA?
Yes, you can. That goes both ways. You can complete admissions before you complete the FAFSA, or the FAFSA before you complete admissions. You just need to complete the FAFSA as soon as it opens, is the way I would probably phrase that. Now, there are some schools that do early admission that will ask you to complete the prior year's document. So some will ask you to complete the 1819 form so they can begin processing any internal scholarships that they might have. A lot of schools use the FAFSA data in determining how much of their own institutional money they're going to give a student. So the early admit schools, you're probably going to want to ask them, do you need both years? And it just depends on the school.
Okay, that's good to know. So kind of along the lines of our next question, which is timing-wise, Bill, if they filled out a FAFSA form last month, and this would be a senior currently in high school, do they need to fill it out again for the following academic year, and do they use 2016 taxes or 2017 taxes?
Very good question. I'm going to add that to the list of questions for next time. The answer is you complete the FAFSA every year the student's in school. The 1819 FAFSA can only be used in this academic year, so they would indeed need to fill in the 1920 FAFSA to be eligible in the fall of 19. So yes, they do need to complete both forms.
Okay, so good to know, and kind of along with timing again, is it safe to plan for 1 to 3 days if the student is starting with the federal ID request or federal ID number request, so they can allow time for the wait time to get that?
It's best to go ahead and do the federal ID as soon as possible. If they have a good email address, I should say, there are times, and it just varies, and I don't know why, that they will almost instantaneously send you your ID. And then there's times that they mail it to you, and it's sort of shifted this year, and I can't give you an exact answer as to whether you'll get it immediately or you'll get it later. I've had people tell me both are occurring, and I've not had a chance to call and find out why. So yes, go ahead and start that ID immediately.
Never too early. Okay, so that's good to know. Bill, timing again, I'm going to give you a couple scenarios for parents, situations, and what you would recommend. So parents who perhaps have retired or have no income after 2017, or self-employed parents where their income varies from year to year. How do you recommend they address that on the form?
The way you address the changing income is not addressed on the form. You list what the income was in 2017. Once the form processes, then you go to the school, and if you remember under my 5 important points, the point communicate. That's the point of communication where you go to the school and you explain your financial situation. In the case of the parent who retired, they can demonstrate that they no longer had the income they had in 17, and then the school, if they choose to do so, and it is an institutional decision, will perform a process called professional judgment. And then they can look at the variance in the income, and they can make that change on the FAFSA, but that's done at the school level. With the varied income based on you're self-employed, it's the same exact situation. I think the difference with the self-employed situation is you're going to have to show that your income hasn't gone back up in the current year. So there's a little more burden of proof on the self-employed person than there would be on the person who retired.
So really important what you said, Bill, that just like you work with your academic advisor at the college, you can work with a financial aid counselor to help you kind of mitigate and work through all of those situations. So really important to stay in touch with them for that. Bill, in terms of additional paperwork for a student who may be emancipated, what type of paperwork or questions do they need to prepare for?
If a student is emancipated, they will have a court order from a judge declaring them emancipated. That is the only document that can be used for emancipation. It's very similar to a divorce, but it's a divorce from the parent. They have to go before a judge. The judge has to declare the child emancipated. At that point, the child cannot receive any form of support at all, inclusive of insurance, from the parent. They would be totally emancipated from the parent. So only a court order suffices.
Okay. Good to know. Bill, in terms of a summer semester, for students who are beginning college in the summer, for example, summer 2019, do they have to complete the 2018-19 FAFSA form? Does summer typically fall within that academic year?
For most schools, you would need to complete the 2018-19 form. There are a very limited number of schools in Florida that treat summer as what we would refer to as a header to the year. It starts their year. Very few of the schools do that, but you should check with the school you're interested in to see if they treat summer as a beginning of the year or an end of the year. Again, most of us treat it as an end of the year. Very few treat it as the beginning.
Okay. Last few questions here, Bill. Thank you so much. Very good information. Federal ID numbers. Does the parent get a federal ID to use on the form, or does it have to be the student's federal ID? How does that work?
Both. Both the student and the parent must have their own federal ID to sign the form. One parent has to have a federal ID to sign, and each student. If there's more than one student in college, each student in college must have their own ID, but a parent must have their own ID too.
Okay, Bill, and then in terms of timing, you mentioned October 1st, and it's close to October 1st, filling out the form. Is it true that the later you submit the FAFSA, the less money you may be eligible to receive in federal aid?
I will answer that a couple of ways. If you get a Pell Grant, your Pell Grant will not change based on the date you complete the free application for federal student aid. Other forms of aid are limited in nature, such as the Supplemental Educational Opportunity Grant, the Florida Student Assistance Grant, and institutional grants. As I stated earlier, many of the schools use the data process of your form to put you in the pool for those additional funds that are limited. So the earlier you apply, the better your chance of getting some of those funds. So the answer is yes, the date you complete the FAFSA, depending on the school you choose, can determine the amount of aid for which you are eligible.
So Bill, again, kind of staying with timing, we must have an audience that's really planning to get this on time. Yeah, that's great. If a student is planning to take a year to work after high school graduation or a gap year before they go to college, should they still fill out the FAFSA now if they're a senior, or should they wait until they're ready to attend?
Well, they should, if they're going to take a gap year, and I understand that's a new thing, but I will tell you that in my research, gap years turn into multiple years too many times, and I generally discourage students from a gap year. But if they're going to take a gap year, they really don't need to fill in the form until next year when they would fill in the form for the 2021 year. So they could go by without filling it in this year. It's not going to change their eligibility for federal aid when they apply. They would still be first time in college. I will remind you, however, that with the Bright Futures funds, if you take a gap year, make sure it's not going to impact your eligibility.
All right, so all good points to remember. Bill, I'm going to ask you sort of a specific question, but I think it'll apply to a few members of our audience, and that is for the students who have parents with joint custody in two different states, one of the states, Florida, and then a different state. How does that affect the application process if they're applying to schools both here in Florida and out of state? What are your recommendations to think about?
Well, I guess my question is, first of all, what state is the student graduating in? That's the first question that I would ask. That's probably going to initially become their state of residence. Now, if the parent resides in Florida, for instance, but the student's graduating in Michigan, they can still get Florida residency because of the parent living here, but they wouldn't qualify for any state funds. Or any Bright Futures funds, I should say. So it really boils down to where's the student living, because that's the parent that is required to fill in the free application for federal student aid. I'm not trying to hedge on that question, but there are so many nuances there that it's a little difficult to give just this is the answer without having the facts in hand. But as a rule, the parent with whom the student lives fills in the form. Residency is usually initially determined by their application to the school and the parent that they're living with, but then they can petition based on the parents, if the parent's in Florida, the parent's state residence in Florida. I know that's convoluted, and I apologize.
No, that's very helpful. Bill, I know it helped our audience kind of think through the different scenarios. And like you said, lots of colleges and universities have financial aid offices with experts that can help answer those types of specific questions. So whether it's here in Florida or any other state. So definitely encourage the students listening to connect with them. Bill, one more piece or one more question, if you don't mind, and something outside of the FAFSA a little bit, but for students who are looking at other merit-based or other types of scholarships and financial aid options, do you have recommendations for websites where they can go to and get started with a sort of a general scholarship search?
Yes, they can go to the College Board website. The College Board has a free scholarship search out there. FastWeb, and I can never remember if FastWeb is org or com, but FastWeb has several scholarship searches that are free, as does finaid.org. All three of those, there's free scholarship searches, and I would encourage parents to go out and look and students to go out and complete the process, just so the parents will know. The information on the free sites are identical to what someone who's charging you to do this will ask. The only difference is they will then input it to these free sites and get the information. So you're doing it for free using the same information. These are good sites and will provide you with a great deal of information if you qualify for anything.
Absolutely, Bill, and I think for the most part it's safe to say that you should never have to pay a fee or pay anybody to be able to do these types of things for things that are federal or are free to use, right?
Exactly.
Yeah. Very good. Well, thank you, Bill. I'll say that the last few questions we have are related to our giveaways and our scholarship. So if you don't mind, I'd like to talk about our giveaway for the afternoon. For our audience, if you joined us today, you've been entered to win a swag bag from our Florida colleges and universities. So we're going to be drawing names at the end of the night, and we're going to announce the winners on all of our social media tomorrow. So follow us at FL Shines on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram. Again, FL Shines. Good luck. Now, after this session, possibly Monday, you will receive an email with details on how to apply for the $1,000 scholarship that's part of Virtual College Week. So also be on the lookout for that email coming your way. So Bill, on behalf of the Florida Shines team here, I really want to thank you for spending the afternoon with us and sharing your expertise in this area. It's such an important part of preparing for college, it's paying for college, and so we thank you for joining us today.
Thank you for the opportunity to share this information with family.
Thank you. So this concludes our last webinar of the afternoon. Thank you for joining us today.